Hey, church, I just want to take a few minutes on this blustery Tuesday afternoon during the storm that we're supposed to be having and share with you just some thoughts and reflections on the book of Romans, some thoughts and reflections on our culture, and just try and kind of continue a form of a dialogue. A lot of our conversations are now, because they happen digitally, I want to just to help create a sense of dialogue with just kind of weekly bringing a video about different things that are happening. And again, if this sparks any thoughts or concerns or questions or comments, feel free to post below or send me an email or a text or something, and we can continue this conversation. This is really for the church to dialogue well about faith and culture. When I was gone on vacation back home in Wisconsin, on our way, I was reading a book called Magnificent Rebels. It's by Andrea Wolfe, and here's the tagline. It's "The First Romantics and the Invention of the Self." It was an incredible book. It combined some of my favorite topics, literature, history, and current culture. And it was about the First Romantics, which were a group of people in the early 1800s who got together in this kind of little town in Germany. And these were theologians, and they were writers, poets, they were artists, and so on. And they started to write, and they started to dialogue as they were gathering together. A guy named Goethe, a guy named Fichte, some other people as well that you may have heard of, but those are the two big ones. And they developed this sense of the I, like capital I, like I went to the store, that had never really been heard of before, or never really been placed in a context that they had been placing in it. So I thought it was really interesting, and I thought helpful in understanding kind of how did we get to the place that we are today. So let me track a little bit with you and talk about the I, like I went to the store, talk about the I and where we've been led to and where we are now, and how as Christians we're to respond to that. So around the turn of the 19th century, so the 1800s, late 1790s, this group in Germany started writing and philosophy, poetry, books, kind of around this concept of the I. Previous to that, the concept of the I, again, I went to the store, that kind of I, the concept of the I had been connected to somebody else always, or the group of people you were associated with. So it was I with another. I am a part of this group. I'm a part of this town. I'm a part of this family. It was always I with somebody else. Well, when this group started writing about the I and placing the individual in the center of the universe, so to speak, they removed that with, and it was no longer I with another. It was more I rebelling against a culture. They weren't directly rebelling against other people, but they were rebelling against the idea of being connected to a larger culture. And so it was I against another. And so that began to develop the sense of the I against another. I am going to do what I want to do regardless of what it costs somebody else. I'm going to act in the way I want to act regardless of what it costs somebody else, regardless of the message it sends. And that may sound good for a while to have that sense of self. It may even sound a little bit like freedom. I assure you it's not, but I may sound a little bit like freedom. And that sense of the I has developed and multiplied and inflated to the place where now it's not I against another. It's actually kind of evolved a little bit to, in our current culture, it's I instead of the other. We've evolved this idea of the I, and almost to a divine-like status, like the I is the God in the story. The I is the center of the universe. As Christians, we reject that idea, but in our culture, we have to understand the way in which we live in the culture so that we can understand how the culture lives, but then also be able to look and live counterculturally. How does Christ call us to live? And so because this idea of the I has kind of almost evolved to a divine-like state to where the I is the center of our universe, the I is now seen to be responsible for either rejecting or receiving others based on whatever idea it is we feel to be most pleasant at the time. So it's not with another like it was originally. It's not even against another, it's instead of the other. There's no foundation when it's I instead of the other, when everyone's living I instead of the other. And so what are we called to do as Christ followers if we're living in a culture of I instead of the other? Well, the book of Romans has been clear, I think, in detailing the ideas of trying to use the I to find salvation. We'll see that clearly in Romans 7 in a couple of weeks, but we'll get glimpses of it this week. But we see that Paul is showing places where we've used other things or other people or our ideas or our tradition or our past to try and find places of salvation that just end up not working. So the I has to be pushed, not in the center of the universe, but has to be pushed again to the margins of the universe and have somebody else, someone else, take its place. And that's where we say Christ belongs, in the center of the universe. That Christ is the hero of every story, not humanity. And so what does that do for us as we look at the book of Romans, as we look at the I not being in the center, but Christ being in the center, and the I being pushed to the margins back to with another? How do we engage with the other in our culture today? We're loved. We're created with purpose. We're created with intention. We're created in His image. But we have to have a rightful response to what humanity is, to what the I is. And so, as we learned in Romans 3, that while we were still yet sinners, Christ died for us. We recognize that Christ took a position. Christ is for the other. And so what does the I do then as a Christ follower? The I is for another. The I, the self, the way we define and describe ourselves is super useful. It's incredibly useful in our world. It just has to be determined what it is we use it for. So for us, for the Christ follower, I becomes for the other. That's how we treat people in the world. That's how we treat people in the church. We'll see that as Paul gets past into Romans 9, 10, 11, 12 and onward. We'll see what he means by I for the other. That's my language I'm giving to the book, but Paul talks about what it means to care for the weak amongst us, to care for the other, to look out for, and so on. And so the language of the Christian is not I instead of the other, but it's I for the other. And we'll see that as Paul details it as we move on through the book of Romans. So for the Christ follower, for the Christian, we see life differently. We see it counterculturally, not as I instead of the other, but as I for the other. Hopefully we'll learn more and more what that means as we live in community together and follow Christ, who is the hero of our every story.